All right, so how many people are enjoying the morning so far? All right, so if you didn't raise your hand, that's an awkward thing to do, right? So today we're going to have a really cool conversation, I think, about people. And so we're going to take this in a different, probably, path than you think we're going to. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. I would love to keep this as interactive as possible. We have, yes, some slides to go through, but I would love your interaction to shape kind of where this goes. Sound good? So how many of you believe, just by a show of hands, that life is short? Okay. How many of you want to have an outstanding life as you are here for this short period of time? And how many of you know that you are only here because of the people around you, like the people that have helped mentor you, guide you, shape you, shift you, if you will, that you got here because lots of people poured into who you are and helped make you who you are here today? Great. So the first person that popped in your mind that helped you get here today, I want you to write down their name. So this will be a writing exercise here today with me. A little bit of work we're going to do together. I think the best way to get the most out of something is the old adage of what you put in is what you get out. So write down that name of that person and just maybe the one or two reasons why they helped shape who you are. All right. So as you write down that person's name, I know for me recently, I got to thinking about kind of family. I got to thinking about, kind of where I am in life right now. And there was a woman who introduced me to my wife, who I have not reached back out to. I've been married for 11 years. I've been together with Erica for 13 years. And she is legitimately the one who set us up on this blind date. And it has been no less than 5 or 6 years that I shot a note to her just to show her where our family is. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, a little girl, a little boy. And, I know this to be true. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to sound feel good, but as you can see from the title of the presentation and the book that's sitting in front of you, this is all rooted not in pseudoscience, but in real science. So I'm going to encourage you, how many of you would be up for, in the next 24 hours, finding a way to show gratitude to that person that you wrote down on that page? Say aye.
Aye.
Great. So now I'm going to ask you a different question. So now you've got sort of this person in your life that has helped you become who you are. You've probably had lots of people. Now let's go to the different sort of side of this spectrum. How do you know someone right now who does not look forward to Mondays? You work with this person. And so what we're going to talk about today is the idea that if you don't look forward to Mondays, it's time to figure something else out. As we talked about, life is really short. As we talked about the idea that if you decide to do something for a period of your life, we spend a third of our waking time at work. And as Richard said earlier today, there has never been a time where we have more job openings and less people to fill those jobs than ever before. So there is no excuse to sit miserable at the job that you have, to have the Sunday scaries, to sort of look at your clock all day and not, sort of have this sense of, I can't wait to get to the weekends, when in fact, again, you spend a third of your waking time at work. So I know this isn't you, otherwise you wouldn't be in the room here. You wouldn't surround yourself with the type of people that SIG does. But what I would ask you to do is I want you to write down that person's name who first comes to mind, who doesn't look forward to Mondays. Because in addition to helping yourself today, in addition to helping your organization, I'd love for us to maybe sort of pay it forward. In the same way someone helped you get into this room, how many people would be up for maybe helping this person shift the way that they're thinking about work? Say aye.
Aye.
All right. Not everybody raised their hand, so I'm not exactly sure why you didn't, but that's, again, a little strange if you're not going to play along. So what I would love for you to get out of the next hour or so is first to learn. And so learn how to shift the engagement of your organization. Everything we're going to talk about today is not the feel-good stuff only. As Millman talked about up here, I love the idea of measuring things and putting metrics and data to stuff, because to us, over the last 20 years, we've worked with more than 600 plus organizations. We've had the fortune of really learning from those organizations. And what I can tell you is this. we finally have the data to suggest that if people look forward to Mondays, and if you can measure that engagement, it drives higher performance. And we all know that if you have a higher performing team, that tends to be a good thing, right? Is your organization looking to increase the productivity, the profitability of your organization, yes or no? Yes. Like, are you looking to find a way to stretch the dollar and to sort of get from point A to point B in a little smarter way, yes or no? Yes. Are you looking to stop telling your employees just to work more hours? Because at the end of the day, there's this whole wave of work-life balance and people trying to find a way that work does not send them home less of who they were when they started the day. You have this whole wave of who's the best place to work. You have this whole wave of trying to find a way to attract and retain the best talent. And I love the analogy of you can either be the bee or the flower. Like, you can be the busy bee that sort of goes out there and tries to seek out that talent, or you can be a flower that sort of attracts the best bees. I think every organization has the opportunity to think about that differently. The second piece is I want you to get, and so we're going to make this, as I said today, less of a presentation, less of a speaking event, more of an experience, more of a learning opportunity, and really a workshop. We're big fans of enabling people with tools, and so today, out of the 27 exercises that we put in the book that's sitting in front of you, which, by the way, is a gift from Richard. This book has not yet come out. We're going to talk a little bit about this. The pub date on the book is August 28th, so you have an advanced reader copy if you've never had one. Congratulations, you have one. Thanks to Richard. Yes.
Thanks to Joe.
And you also have a really cool note in there, by the way. It's been personalized for you. So if you open up the book, you'll see a note from Richard. These were specially printed for you. And this is all Richard and his team, who, by the way, are phenomenal. The last thing is I want you to feel energized. I want you to feel excited. I want you to have a higher level of energy. Because to me, I think this is, again, the example that kind of the way that we all got here was that someone helped us get here. And I think a lot of these sort of principles or things that I might talk about today, it is your opportunity. I mean, how many of you know that when you help someone else, if you're really being intellectually and emotionally honest, it's absolutely to help them. But if you're really being honest, it also feels good. How many people know what I'm talking about? And so to me, the opportunity isn't just another Wednesday. The opportunity is for you to go back to your organization and maybe give them a few of these tools that we're going to talk about today so that you don't go back sort of sounding like you've drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but you go back with really transferable tools so that your organization can think differently about its culture and about its employee experience. How's that sound for a good start for today? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. So this all started from me about 6 years ago when I published our first book at Shift. It was a book that sort of was interesting. It was a kind of an homage to the first 12 or 13 years of our business. The book was called Grow Regardless. It was specifically designed and written for an executive or an entrepreneur. It was the idea that we were coming out of the recession. It was an idea of you can get through this no matter what, regardless of the circumstances. And as a guy who, I'm originally from Baltimore City. I went to Patterson High School, which if you're in Baltimore, you have to say where you went to high school. How many people here are from Baltimore? How many people get that idea? But when I say Patterson High School, how many of you are from the city? Right. So when I say Patterson, it's not your typical schools that you might hear of often in Baltimore because, this is a pretty tough school. It's actually still one of the worst high schools in the state of Maryland. We started out with 965 freshmen. We graduated 235 seniors. And about a handful or two of us went to college after. Now, many people have been successful. I'm not suggesting that there weren't really smart people, but it was a tough school. And when I took my SATs, I've told this story a couple times, which is I got a 400 on my verbal on my SAT. And for those who remember what your score was on your verbal and your SAT, that's borderline illiterate. So for me, writing a book was a pretty scary thing because, one, I have a hard time because of maybe a little bit of dyslexia. But the other side of it is, who really cares about hearing your voice? Well, what I will share with you is this. This book wasn't successful and hit the New York Times because of what I said and what we've done. It started the conversation that we're going to have here today. Because what I didn't know when writing this book, yes, we beat, by the way, just as an aside, 50 Shades of Grey for 3 days, which was kind of cool. A book I still have yet to read. But the book talked about these three dynamics happening in the world. So the first is that we're a distracted society. We're distracted human beings. That still today, many of you, and I know because I drive, I can see you, how many people watch people who are texting and driving still today? Okay, that would be like if you were just kind of opening up the bottle of wine or the fifth of vodka or opening up the beer. I mean, studies have shown that there's actually more harm in driving while distracted, texting on your phone, than actually drinking and driving. But we as a society, we still do it. We are attached, and by the way, by calling them phones is actually probably the worst definition of all time. I mean, you barely use the phone for the phone, right? And the idea that we know some of these things that have sort of come to bear in terms of, science and the new learnings of research about why we do what we do, we're still, a country that I believe in every way, shape, or form. But as a country, we're still not really kind of reaching our full potential. Like, we are struggling with mental health. We're struggling with physical health. We're struggling with emotional health. And, companies like SIG, organizations maybe like yourself, are starting to think that this isn't just about the 9-to-5 time that you have your teammates or employees, that you've got to start investing more fully in the whole self. That what someone goes through on the weekends or at nights, if you think they're able to compartmentalize that in a nice, neat suitcase and just show up as a different person, you're fooling yourself in a just most ridiculous way possible. We are who we are, as Popeye said. And so for me, the opportunity is, how do we think about that differently? Second, disengaged. I talked a lot about this in Grow Regardless. We've seen this. Gallup published a poll since 2000. This is their famous Gallup Q 12 poll that measures engagement. It asks 12 questions. It basically is a very benign way of asking, do your people understand what is expected of them at work? And we know from the research that 70% of the American workforce is not engaged. So every time we meet an organization, and we've had the opportunity over the last 5 or 6 years to be, again, incredibly fortunate. We are now in 6 cities, Boston, Seattle, Philly, DC, and Baltimore. We're working with some really interesting organizations. And these organizations, we've seen this happen, which is the ones who are absolutely making this a priority are the ones that are finding that their time to fill positions is shrinking. They're starting to see that their lifetime value of an employee is increasing. In some cases, they're even seeing the retention numbers head in the right direction. But again, this is a choice. This is an opportunity, if you will, for your organization to think differently. And the last piece, I think, is happening that everyone I meet will acknowledge this, because the easiest way to pick on trust in our society and in your organization is to think about politics. And politics rubs off on us. It's like residue. And how many people feel like right now we are lacking trust in this country in a big way? And whether you think that cynicism doesn't hit your organization, it does. So you could offer the best employee benefits ever, but if your people don't trust you, it doesn't matter. And we'll talk a little bit about the 3 dynamics of trust if you want to write them down, by the way. It's the way that we unpack trust. We think trust is a function of sincerity, competence, and reliability. Sincerity, competence, and reliability. Some other data that you might be interested in. 25%, as researched by Deloitte, 25% of the day of an average worker is spent responding and reading emails. How many people buy that? How many people think that's sad? Yeah. Another interesting stat, more than 80% of all companies rate their business as highly complex or complex for their employees. In other words, it's hard to navigate. It's hard to understand this question. This question is single-handedly, to me, one of the most important things you can do, because it's the question of what is most important today. I would encourage you at the beginning of every meeting that you do with your employees, ask that simple question. What's most important for us to accomplish in this segment of time? Because if you can do that, it helps us all prioritize and, frankly, remove or eliminate some of those distractions. Last one I'll hit on is 40% of the U.S. population believes it's impossible to succeed at my work and have a balanced family life. Is it any wonder that we are struggling with a lot of the things that we see in the news today, because people are having a hard time of what we like to say at Shift, having it all. Like, why can't you be an amazing person in your family? Why can't you be an amazing friend? And why can't we use work, now watch this language, as a weapon to find your best self, as an advantage, as opposed to the single greatest drain of who you are? You're going to spend a third of your time there. I'm going to say this probably 10 more times because until it sinks in that you understand that work is the family you chose, and the old adage that you're the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with most. Have you heard that before? To me, that's the opportunity. So, when Richard talks about choice in the beginning of this, like you had a choice to come here today. You have a choice to go back to work. Like, this is not like maybe 30 years ago where we all worked just to make it by. Like just to get by. Because you were afraid that if you didn't work at the place you did, you couldn't find another job. Those days are over. And your people know it. And so this is why these dynamics are not just the touchy-feely stuff, but they really do make a difference. We talked about the 70% of the people not engaged. This, to me, is just a funny picture of how evolution of the human species over the last 40,000 years has evolved. And this is a quick little interesting bit on where we spend our time. So, as Richard talked about, by the way, I have become a new believer in the importance of sleep. There's a guy named Dr. Matt Walker. I would highly recommend checking him out. He talks a lot, and he's written a book recently. And basically, for a guy who used to get by on about 4 to 6 hours a night through most of my life, about a year ago, I found, if you will, a bit of religion on the fact that 7 at a minimum is what we need to get by. And what they're starting to see, just to keep this in kind of the health conversation, is that Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, the plaque that sits in between your neurons in your brain, that plaque doesn't get washed out until you sleep about 6 or 7 hours a night. So not as the cure-all, not as the absolute only contributing factor, but sleep is really, really, really important. And then again, we spend most of our time at work.
Hey, Joe, quick testimonial while we get through that is that we're going to be giving away a raffle of 4 Muse headbands that people probably don't even know what it was, but just as relates to sleep, what's, I guess, a bullet that you would say when you hear sleep and Muse headbands or meditation?
Yeah, so, so great question. We'll talk about this a little bit, but I would just say, how many people here have tried meditating before? How many people are practicers of maybe a daily practice? And so you saw the difference in the hands, right? So a lot of people have tried it. Some people here have stuck with it. I would say that the science is going to come out that exercise is incredibly important. Nutrition is really important. Sleep is really important. But the third most important pillar of your well-being, your decision-making, which, by the way, if you're an organization, you should really care about the way people make decisions. And the quick little bit that I usually share with people is, how many of you would be super excited about jumping on a plane today with a pilot who's really stressed out? Yeah, because the stakes are high, like literally and figuratively, right? But to me, the idea in your organization is, how do you increase and raise the stakes in any event? And so meditation, if you're not using it, what he's referencing is there's a quick little headband called Muse Meditation. It's about $250 if you don't win the rally here, or the raffle, not the rally, the raffle today. I would highly encourage you to do it, because how many of you think that sometimes you're stuck in your own head a little too much? How many of you think you could manage stress or your emotions better? How many of you think that biochemically changes who you are? And so walk this line with me. If you're in a chronic state of stress because you're not journaling, going to therapy, meditating, being a good friend, finding a way to shift that, it would be no different than if you ate Doritos every day and drank Mountain Dew for 10 years too. What would happen to your body if you did that? You don't need to be a nutritionist like Rachel to know that that's not good. But we have this science at our fingertips, if you will. You can Google this. You don't have to believe anything I say here today, right? This stuff is sort of evolving at such a speed that when I wrote this book 18 months ago, I've had to put so many iterations because the science that's coming about, what we're learning about the brains in the body, the biology of the body, this stuff is fascinating. We've learned more about your brain in the last 3 years than we've learned about it in the last thousands of years. And it's fascinating to learn why we do what we do. So we talked about the Sunday scaries. This is a real thing. So this looks like a joke, but it's a real thing. There are people that go through a mountain of stress on Sunday because they're about to do this. And this would be a good thing to jot down. We as Americans, particularly as human beings, we love the idea of choice, freedom, and independence. How many people can get that? Say aye.
All right.
This country was founded on the idea of freedom, freedom of choice. So on the weekends, you get to do what you want to do. But then you transition to 5 days of suggesting that you have to do these things. And how many of you like to be told what to do? Just curious. How many of you like sort of not being given a choice on things? How many parents are in the room who really get this when you're working with your kids? Like if you don't give them choices, I've learned this from some really good parents in the room, about really allowing and enabling people to have choice, particularly little ones. Because you know what's interesting about that, just as another aside? When you give people options, you begin treating them as adults. And when you limit their options, you begin treating them like children. And you know what's interesting? When you treat people like children, guess how they act? Like children. So when you put all these rules and regulations, with all respect to the HR professionals in the room, I realize that there is reasons for some of this, that we need some baseline level compliance, guidelines of what is good and what is not good. But at the end of the day, if you put these rules in place, what you're really saying is, I don't trust you. And what's interesting about trust is if you don't give it, you don't get it. And put that on your balance sheet. Because if you work in an environment where people feel like they've got to watch their backs all the time, another interesting thing that Deloitte found, this is a really important thing. How many of you have done employee surveys ever? And so I would encourage you to add some form of this question. Please jot this down. Which is, does the organization have my back? Now, it doesn't always play out well. We did this once in a sort of an educational environment. They were not a big fan of the way that we worded that question because it has other implications, of course, in terms of maybe not being a fully transparent organization. But that was not the point. The point is, when you're in a high trust environment, you're willing to actually fail forward. You're willing to innovate. You're willing to take risks because you believe there's a net underneath of you. Does that make sense? And so as organizations, we think that's the opportunity. So the book was written for executives and employees, and what I found was over the last 5 or 6 years, what we've had the opportunity to do is make a bigger impact with people's employees, with their organizations as a whole. What we found was, as much as leadership at the top is important, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've partnered with the sides of an organization, the HR departments, the mid-level managers, because these are the folks that are closer to the fire. There's the old adage, right? Those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. But so often we use the org chart as the way to dictate the solution set moving forward. Well, we believe there's a new day coming. And part of it is you guys get a chance to potentially champion this and be kind of the humble warriors of your organization of driving change. Now, one of the things you're going to have to learn, not only adult learning, not only a little bit of psychology, but I think this triangle is also interesting in terms of the way that the workday plays out. So here, this has been called the triangle of disempowerment, the drama triangle. It's got a bunch of different reference points. They've used different words for each one of the categories. But if you take a look, on one side of the category here, you have the persecutor. And the persecutor is the person who, here's another word for it, a bully. How many of you have, again, you don't have to list their names out, but how many of you sometimes experience a bully in the workplace? Okay, good. Honesty, by the way, is good. Rescuer. This is a martyr. This is the person that's got to be the one to save it. This is also kind of the person who would jump on the grenade, so to speak, figuratively, of course. This is the person that will burn themselves out to the point they make themselves physically sick for the cause. This is the person that doesn't fill themselves up first. How many of you know someone who's like that? How many of you have found yourself in that particular situation at times? And then lastly, there's the victim, the poor me. This is the person who has a kind of the ability sometimes, without knowing it, they make it all about themselves. Like every time it happens, they're like, I can't believe it's raining again and this is happening to me. Like the rain's not happening to you, it's actually happening for you so that when the sun comes out the next day, you will appreciate it even more. How many people get that? Say yes. So this is to me the conversation that you have the opportunity to have with your people. Now, here's the other thing I believe that's important. Back to the idea of being intellectually, emotionally, and heck, even spiritually honest, is that we all show up in that triangle. Okay? none of us in this room are above this triangle. And our peaks, maybe we're amazing. But our valleys, not so much. And I can speak personally to this because of this little guy. Okay? So I have never shared this story ever in front of the room as I'm about to do. But I do also share this story in the first chapter of the book. So all of this to me came because in 2013, what I showed you was I wrote a book, a kid who never thought he'd write a book, a kid who never thought he'd get out of the neighborhood, a kid who used to sell drugs when I was very young, a kid who used to break the law, a kid who was probably not looked at as someone who was ever going to get out of what I was out of. And so when I made it out, I got to tell you, I was pretty damn excited. I got a book sitting on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm being interviewed by Fox, by Bloomberg. I'm being flown in to speak at all these conferences. The Ravens went to the Super Bowl. I took my dad down to New Orleans. We had this amazing father-son bonding moment. I mean, I can go on and on and on about all the amazing things that happened. But the one thing I'm forgetting to tell you that is in that same year my son was born. Now, what's kind of cool is we have two amazing, beautiful kids. So big shout out to my daughter Ellie, who's a bit older than James. And when James was born, it was a little different. How many of you have two kids and they're completely different? Yeah, so I didn't get this as a new dad. Like I even probably called Richard and Don, who's here, two great dads, and I was like, I don't get this kind of thing. Like, why is one amazing? My daughter slept through the night. My daughter was like easy for everything she possibly did. She was the biggest head fake imaginable. Because when we had our son, this was a hard pregnancy. My wife was in bed for 6 months. This was the kind of thing when he was born in December 27, in 2012. You know, he didn't sleep. And when I say he didn't sleep, I'm talking about for a year. Like it was one of these things where I would grab him. I remember when Ellie, I held her for the first time, and I felt like a dad immediately. Just being honest. Like I cried. I thought about my mom who passed when I was young. I thought about my dad and all the sacrifices he made. I thought about the responsibility I had. I thought about what she would teach me. I thought about all these amazing daughter walks that we were going to take. Like it was just amazing. When my son was born, the novelty effect wore off. By the way, I tried to plug in at the house, but I became the persecutor at my house. I couldn't understand why my wife wasn't happy. I couldn't understand why she was doing this to me. And then at times I would try to run in and save the day, not knowing the exact routine because he didn't have a routine at the time. We thought he had colic, acid reflux. And I also noticed that I started being different at work. That I showed up a little edgy, a little moody. Heck, I was even depressed. And then I got really happy. And then I got depressed again. And really happy. And so I share this story because, we all fall down and we all struggle. And so what this represents is the first time I felt like his father. Because a year later, he got minor surgery to fix his tear ducts and his sinuses. And all of a sudden, when he came out of that surgery, he slept. And he was this kid who grabbed me when he left. That is legitimately the first time that I hugged him, and I felt the same way I did with Ellie a year later. So at that point in time, if I'm being honest, I felt a lot of guilt. Like I had wasted his first year. I wasn't there for him. And you're like, when is he going to start talking about the work stuff? Don't worry, it's coming. But for me, in sharing this story, I am assured you've gone through something similar at some point in your life. And I know for a fact, because we've been doing this for a while, that so are people in your organization. It doesn't have to be with children. It could be with parents. It doesn't have to be with anyone. Maybe it's just themselves. Maybe they missed their big promotion. Maybe they want more money. Maybe they're not sure about their career path. Maybe they don't like their boss. These things mentally and emotionally affect the way that your employees have a connective tissue to your place. So the question is, what do we do about it? Well, in 2014 and 15, quickly, we said you should pay people more money because everybody could see this wave that millennials were lazy and entitled and just needed more money and more promotion. Well, here's what we learned. That didn't work. Well, maybe we just need more training. I mean, training's got to be the answer, right? Like give people, enrich their souls, teach them new skills, help them build their confidence. Well, guess what that did? Nothing to very little to move the needle. So what I decided to do was look at more science. And so what we learned was if the world feels like this at times, which is like they're drowning because of work, the question is, can we look at a little science? And so I'm not suggesting I'm a scientist here today. I'm a curator of what I learned. And what I learned is, first and foremost, you have more than one brain in your body. You have 1 billion neurons or so in your head. You have 40 million neurons in your heart, and you have 100 million neurons in your gut. And in fact, they're starting to see the connection between the gut and the brain in your head. They're starting to see the decisions that you make are differently. How many of you have ever heard the adage, follow your heart before? Or trust your gut? How many of you have ever been at the top of a roller coaster and felt those butterflies in your belly? Those are not butterflies, by the way. Seriously, they're not. It's cortisol, the stress hormone. 70% of it comes from your gut. Coincidentally, 70% of the serotonin comes from your gut. And so what we started to do is, how do you unpack this in the workplace? Like, how do you apply this to HR, learning development, and performance management? So what I'm going to give to you today are 3 simple tools to figure this out. And if you think about it, here's the summary version of this, which is the brain in your head is about prioritization. Think of it as a spotlight. Where do I focus? Okay? The brain in your head is also, think about the triangle of drama. This is really about focusing not as the victim, but the victor. Okay? The brain in the heart. By the way, if 70% of the American workforce is not engaged, 70% not engaged, and we've only been focused on helping people tactically, logistically, what are we missing? To us, we're missing the equation of the other 70% of the brains in your body, i.e. the heart and the gut. Just think about it. It maps. So the brain and the heart. This is what you hear a lot of me doing right now. So part of this is for you to see like a live example of this. How fast do you think my heart is beating right now? And this is without coffee today. Right? And what I would suggest to you is, have you ever heard the adage, does this place make your heart beat faster? There is truth in cliches and platitudes, but we've sort of extinguished it all out because we've overused them, we've misused them, and so all of a sudden they don't resonate anymore. It's almost like, have you ever met someone who, when you meet them and you do something nice and they say thank you all the time, like thank you for opening the door, thank you for doing this, thank you for doing that, thank you for doing this, and it sort of loses its essence and emotion? Well, so have these adages of following your heart and trust your gut. And the gut, my most important one, I think, around purpose. Gut is the most interesting one because 90% of your immune system, and a lot of the things that you heard from the earlier presentation today, to make people healthy, how many of you believe nutrition is a really important thing? What you put out is what you get out. How many people believe that? And what's interesting is as you see Rachel going out there and really, I think, spreading the good word around this, is that if you want people to make better decisions, if you want them to think more critically, I mean, don't you remember taking tests and your parents making you a special breakfast that day so that you could think better, so that you were cared for? If you don't think that stuff adds up, it does, and it will. So let's break this down. The brain in your head, quickly, is about choice. This is the choice. Are you going to turn lemons into lemonade? Do you have the ability to find hope and some level of reasoning for this to happen? Said another way, is life happening to you or for you? I remember I was young. I went to my mom's funeral at 23. That was the 23rd funeral I had went through by the time I was 23. Sort of an interesting number for me, not just Michael Jordan, but that number resonates to me. And I remember for the next 5 years, I kept thinking that things were happening to me. That woe is me, I've got it bad. And then you know what I did? I started traveling the world and I realized I had it really good. How many people get that? How many people have taken a trip overseas recently? If you haven't, I would encourage you please to do this. Like, get out of the bubble. We have an amazingly awesome life here in this country. And sometimes perspective is all we need. Every single person in this room has had trauma in their life. Every single person. No matter how great or how bad or how different from yours. It's all relative. And as we all go work together side by side each day, shoulder to shoulder, belly to belly, we all have to deal with what we're all dealing with. And so the question is, can you figure this out? Can you figure out how to go from victim to victor? And this takes effort. So finally, we're at the point where I'm going to give you your first tool for the day, which is, from a business point of view, after working with so many organizations, specifically in the last 3 to 5 years, we've been able to partner with some really interesting companies that have been best places to work, that were great organizations before we got there. But when we started asking their people these questions, it started to move the needle. So you can take a picture of these questions, or you can just actually answer them, which is what I'm going to ask that you do right now. Because to me, if you can't answer these questions, you're not thinking of work as that weapon. We believe, by the way, that work could single-handedly be the biggest lever of human potential, is this sort of more engaged workforce. But you got to start with the basics. So what do you want to experience this year? I mean, think about that question. It's almost like if you went to your favorite restaurant. How many of you have a favorite restaurant? The rest of you have no favorite restaurant. That's right. Every time you don't raise your hand for a no-brainer question, I'm going to make fun of you. And so if you have a favorite restaurant, I know that recently in Baltimore, I've gone to Italian Disco 8 times in the last 3 weeks since it's opened. Okay? How many people know Italian Disco downtown in Harbor East? A few of us from the area. And what I would say to you is this. Sometimes I've gone in with the kids, and we just want to get through the meal because they're 7 and 5, and let's be honest, that's a win. Okay? I recently went with my parents on Sunday, and I didn't want to just get through the meal. I savored the moment. Like, I wanted to stay there for 3 hours. And what's interesting to me is when the waitress comes by and asks us, have you been here before? She also asks that first question is, what would be most important to you about today's experience? I've worked a lot in sales and call centers inside of organizations, and I will tell you the single greatest lever of improving that customer experience is asking that question, which is, what would be most important to you about today's call? What would be most important to you about today's experience? Because guess what? Some days I want it quick, and some days I want it slow. Sometimes as human beings, though, we have a tendency to think just because we had a memory of the way you liked it once, that you're going to like it that whole way through. That's called confirmation bias. And the only way to sort of beat confirmation bias is to be inquisitive and curious and mindful and reflectful. And so what I want you to do for the first couple minutes here, for the next couple minutes, try to answer these questions. What are your top 3 priorities? What do you want to learn this year? What do you need the most help with, and what do you want to give? You have 2 minutes. Give those a shot. Thanks for coming. How many of you think you need more than a couple minutes to answer these questions? Good. But how many of you get the point of this question and the importance of why these would be table stakes? Table stakes, bare minimum. If you can't answer these questions in your organization, then 2 things. 1, you got to take personal responsibility for your experience and the way that you're giving to your organization. So I don't care who's in the room, I don't care what rank, what level you are, but I would encourage you to live your life in your way. And so clarity is real power, but when you can answer these questions. But on the flip side, it's the organization's responsibility to make space for these questions as well. How many people get that? Better us. So you'll notice a difference, or sort of a way to think about this. The brain and the head we see often as sort of taking care of the body. The brain and the heart is interesting because when people are really passionate, do you notice they sort of pound their chest? Or how do we hug, as an example? Like, can I have a hug? I'm just kidding. Breaking all sort of HR rules, I know. I'm just kidding. I hugged Richard earlier today, but where do we hug? Heart too? We've been doing that as human beings for 40,000 years. That's how we show compassion. There's a lot of science sitting in my book about the heart. They know that when you transplant a heart from one person to the next, did you know that your heart has taste buds? And that those taste buds carry forward to the donee from the donor. So again, these are things that we didn't know 3 or 4 years ago, but we're learning. And so the way to think about the heart is what we appreciate appreciates. This has been a big learning for me in terms of personal relationship. You know, having spent now 11 years this December with my wife, has anyone ever experienced that sometimes things get a little not as new and exciting and fun and as amazing and as the first date, and it was just amazing and it was great, and the honeymoon, it was all perfect, and she never heard me fart or burp or all those other things. Like, how many people know what I'm talking about, right? How many people know that from a relationship standpoint with your organization, you walked in, you saw the kitchen, this is amazing, I can't wait to do this, and my boss is great, and things are clean, and it's just amazing. But we have a tendency as human beings as the shiny penny object, like we look at something and then all of a sudden it becomes old and we stop appreciating it and then it stops appreciating. Does that make sense? For all the CFOs in the room, you get what I'm talking about. Like, you've got to appreciate so things appreciate. Another way to say this is, and I usually do this exercise, but at a time we're not. So I will tell you, please do this exercise because you heard me say it a little bit. Back when I told you things were flying high for me personally and everything was wonderful and great, and in 2013 the book hit the list, my wife actually sat me down, and this is also in the book, and she said, listen, I don't know how to say this to you. Now, she has a very different recollection of this story than I do. I don't know if you've ever experienced that ever either. But what I heard her say, pardon my French, and I apologize, I'm going to say this, but I heard her say that I was being a shitty dad. That I was amazing with Ellie, but I was not being great with James. That when Ellie, two things that I tried to do a really good job with Ellie, which is every time she had a poopy diaper, that was my thing. Like, I wanted to, I know it's weird, it's not that I'm into poop. I just knew as a guy, guys don't step up in those ways often. Like, I wanted that to be my thing in bath time. And I would actually say things like, I get to do bath time. Like, Richard's heard me say this often. But when James was born, you know what I said? I have to. And so I sometimes do this, which is I ask people to think about, you chose to be here today versus doing something else. When we say yes to some things, we're saying no to something else. Does that make sense? So you said yes to be here today, and so usually what I do is I ask people to think about what are all the things you're going to have to do to make up that time when you go back to the office. You write them all down. I make you tell the person sitting to the left or the right of you, I have to go answer emails. I have to go do client calls. I have to go, I don't know, whatever else that you guys do all day. And then I say, great. How does that feel when you say the words, I have to? And you say, oh, there he goes with that motivational thing again. Well, I'm going to prove to you this isn't motivational. This is biochemistry. And this is science, that if you change it from I have to, which is an obligation, stressful, lacking of choice, to I get to, it changes everything. It changes the way that you honor it. It changes the way that you view it as a privilege. How many of you said ever in the last 7 days that you get to be at work? Oh, I get it. And I'm going to push you to challenge yourself to value your life. So hear this out. Value your life enough that you live life that way. Because what will happen from a biochemical perspective is, there was a great study done in Stanford. And what they found was this. When a person delivered a random act of kindness to someone, the person who was receiving it, their serotonin went up. And serotonin is the thing that makes you feel happy and grateful. And by the way, when you have that chemical inside of you, it's like a cleansing agent. Your body loves it. It feeds on it. It's why it feels good. The person who was giving that random act of kindness, guess what happened to their serotonin level? It went up. But there's one last kicker, which is the people who witnessed the random acts of kindness, guess what happened to their serotonin levels? They also went up. So this idea of saying, I get to be at work, sure, it could be just a quick hack or trick to get your mind to think differently about these things. But I would say, at least at your home life, I remember saying, gosh, I have to be home tonight for dinner. I have to take my wife out for date night. How's that going to work out? How about this? I have to do performance reviews for my employees. So in 2010, I was fired from a publicly traded bank because I told the chief financial officer that, well, I'll just leave the profanity out of it, but I heard him talk to or about his employees around performance review time. He's like, I can't believe I got to do all these effing performance reviews, these people, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not making fun of CFOs. It's just the actual story. So just sit tight with me, okay? And I remember saying to him, you make millions of dollars a year. You're in a publicly traded bank. Let's face it. You hit the lottery. Like, you're not here because of you. You're here because of kind of the way you look, just be honest. You're here because of the start you got. You were born on third. You're rounding home. And now you're looking back at everybody else, and they're an obligation to you. The people that work hard all year round that you make 30 times more than, who wait for this one meeting to sit in front of you to be shown some level of appreciation and value. You're going to tell me that's an obligation. Well, I have a severe problem with that. Because that's in the same vein that you're saying you're losing productivity and profitability and performance. That's in the same vein that you're talking about employee retention and you can't find really good people. Like, add up the math. And the math isn't just, again, these sort of motivational quips. It's really understanding that this stuff is science. And so what we often ask people to do, to take this to the 201 level of your heart, is why do you do what you do? And so this is another tool for you to use. And so I would encourage you to think of it this way. Often, when I started this exercise 20 years ago, we were doing it with kids in Baltimore City. We would ask them, what do you want to be when you get older? And inevitably, where I'm from, they would say a rapper, a basketball player, or a football player. And in one instance, we had a kid who said, I want to be a chef. And so this is usually a 20-minute story that I'm going to tell in about a minute, okay? And so the bottom line is, I know that this kid's going to go back to East Baltimore. I'm fully aware of some of the things that they're going to experience in terms of decision making. I know that when you're hungry, you make really interesting decisions. So I grew up hungry. I grew up like when you open up the fridge and there's nothing in there. I know what that's like not to eat a few meals. Like, I know how that makes you feel. Like, they call it hangry now. That's like a cute way of saying it. But if you don't think that changes your biochemistry, you're out of your mind. And when you get hangry, like I'm a dad now, and so I have no problem admitting on film that if push came to shove, that if I had to feed my family but it meant breaking the law, it would be the easiest decision I'd ever make. How many people can get that? And so for some people, that's just the way that they're being presented opportunity and options. Whether you think that or not, you have to sync with it. So the long story short is I asked this kid 25 times why. The first 10 answers were things like, I want to be a chef because I want money. Money gets me girls, according to him, by the way. I'm just the messenger. That's what he said, okay? He's like, I need a car, I need a home, I need food, etc. Cool! Second 10 answers. I like to help others. I like to be creative. I like to serve people. It would be neat to have my own restaurant one day. Do you see the switch from him to others? And then the last answer he gave, which was technically not 25, it was 23, he said, I want to make my grandmother proud because she raised me and my brothers and sisters. So guess what that kid is today? He is a chef. So then the question is, why do you show up on Monday? Write out 25 answers right now. Like, why do you show up to work on Monday? Why is it important to you? By the way, it took me an hour and a half to get him there. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. There are no bad answers. Just keep writing. Stream of consciousness. For those in the room who've done this, use your non-dominant hand, Richard. It's a little hack for those who've gone through this exercise before. I'm not kidding. Use your non-dominant hand. You'll see the answers will be different. Less what you think they should be and more what they actually are. Some of you have done this before are not doing that. That's fine. But you could. Take one more minute. Just write down as many things as you possibly can. There is a reason for this exercise. This is a tool. It's like going to the gym. If it were easy, everybody would do it. Crazy how many people jump on their phones so quickly. It's okay. All right. Wherever you are with the exercise, take a look at your list. Does not matter. It's no right or wrong. By the way, this is like a judge-free zone for like another 15 minutes. Imagine how good that'll feel. There are no winners or losers. There are no right or wrongs. Take a look at your list, and I want you to circle the answer that you wrote down that you think is the most resonant for you of why do you show up on Mondays. Because if you're really going to make this shift and thinking differently, like if we're going to send you back to be lighthouses inside of your organizations, like if you really want to increase the performance, and I'll share with you a case study or two about why this is important, you got to first do the work. You can't be a pundit or a critic or a person in the stands. The world is done with that. The world wants people sitting in the arena with them. The old Teddy Roosevelt quote, do you know what I'm talking about? So if you can go back and be proof in the pudding, so to speak, it will make it more legitimate. You know, it's sort of another version of integrity. So for 30 seconds, turn to someone that you're not having had a quick conversation with yet. So likely not someone sitting directly next to you, maybe behind you, in front of you. I'm only going to give you literally 30 seconds. I'd like you to introduce yourself and maybe then share the one reason why was most resonant to you that you show up on Mondays. Go.
Hey, Allison, talk to Karen, because I already know you. What's yours? Help people provide families a better life. Help people.
Are the yes cards here?
Yes.
Where are they? I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind handing those out now, please? Just start them at each end of the tables. All right, come on back. So there's a great book that a friend of mine, Yannick Silver, gave me called Unlock Your Inner Genius. In all sincerity, if you've done this exercise a few times or if you plan to, I would encourage you to use your opposite hand. It does force your brain to fire in a different way, and that's a whole other discussion for another day, but something to think about. So anybody here, we'll do maybe one or two shares. Anybody want to share like why you show up on Mondays, like why that's resonant? Yes.
My main one is to be an example to my
Yeah. Yes.
I have a nice bit of feedback. I just graduated and I work for a SIG partner firm in Philadelphia, and mine is to not disappoint my mother.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I had one that was to make my dad proud, but my number one was to make an impact. So it's
Great.
on everything.
These are like severely noble answers, by the way. You guys are great people. What else? Maybe two more. Yes, ma'am. The people. One more? Rachel. Yeah. So for whatever it's worth, whatever your answers are, there are no right or wrong. But I would say this. If you woke up every morning and you journaled this, do you think you'd show up differently for work? Right? Like if you made a plan before you went to the gym, do you think the gym would be a better experience, yes or no?
Yes.
Like I see people sort of slide into the weekends without any sort of transition point. Like do you ever get home and you feel like you're just drained, you don't have anything left, and you're like, holy crap, it's the weekend, now I got to be super dad or super mom or super whatever the case is? So we started a practice at Shift this past year. We've actually had a few interesting ones. So we give the Friday off before Labor Day and Memorial Day. We call them Shift U days, but they're not days that you should take vacations. They're days that you should spend time under a tree reading a poem. They're days that you should go get a massage, days that you should sit around and think, days that you should go do you. Second thing we did back in 2009 is we stopped our organization from doing client work. So we're a management consulting firm. Like we're all about, not in some ways, but certainly a service-based business has to worry about billability, utilization. So on Fridays, we decided that that wasn't going to be the case, that we were going to use 20% of the week to the best of our ability to invest in our team, their competencies, and really just take some space, like hit the pause button. And by the way, it's worked radically well. I mean, we've been named a best place to work 7 times since 2009. We've had a really good run. We've got 30 plus amazing people in those 6 cities I referenced. And I am not the smartest one of the bunch. I am not anywhere near the most talented. Like if you meet them, we've got 2 of them here today, Emily, Maggie, and Alex, who are amazing human beings. And they've decided to join this journey because of these things. And the last one I'll give you is this. How many people work really, and be honest, you think that Friday between the hours of 3 and 5 are super productive? So I'm a simple dude. So I said, well, if it's not productive, then let's not work. So every week, between 3 and 5, we use that as what we call better you time. That's your time to do whatever it takes to wrap the week up, not be in meetings, not be expected to be in the office, certainly, like not that we do that anyway, but that's just silly these days. And the second is, if I really want you to have an amazing weekend where you don't look at me with contempt on Monday, then I give you back that time to make the transition, because we as human beings, we're messy at transitions. And so that if you can go into the weekend and have a full weekend, then maybe you come in Monday a little differently. Does that make sense? From an HR point of view, this is all possible. I don't care what kind of environment, labor, hourly. This is all possible because every time you say it's not, you're making the assumption that the time people are working is fully utilized. And it's not. Under no uncertain terms. You're also making the case, well, our team is already overworked. Probably, but probably on the wrong things. So the question is, to me, this is like one of my favorite quotes, which is life gives to the givers and takes from the takers. And as organizations, it's time for us to stop taking and it's time for us to start giving. Can I get like an amen on that? But it's not easy. It requires constant focus and attention. This is not a free-for-all. This is not where we've given in, so to speak. Like if you're willing to open up Pandora's box on some of these practices, what you're going to find is it's going to cause you personally to become greater than you ever thought you could. Because I liken the analogy, Peter Drucker, one of the things, I wasn't a big fan, but one of the things I loved that he said once was the distance between the leaders and the rest of the organization, and a healthy organization has to remain constant. Because the second the organization starts doing this is when people leave because they don't see growth opportunities. So if you're going to travel down this path, I will say this is no sipping tea. Like don't just dip your toe into it. Some of this will be interesting. Read the book, maybe grab some of the exercises out of it. But unless you're really willing to commit, not to getting it right, but just to commit to seeing what's possible. You see the difference? Like, the difference of saying I'm committed to getting it right is that you're going to control the variables and you're just not. But the difference of saying what's possible is, what Richard said, the idea is simple. Some of the stats that we have today, oh, and you can't pour from an empty cup. I'll show you some of these stats here in a second. But the last brain, as I quickly transition here, is the idea that your gut is important. So we believe this analogy to be true, that if people don't feel like they have a full cup, they won't be their best selves. And this is the idea that people are operating from fear, like I don't trust you, versus faith. And so if you've ever been in an unconditional relationship, I've been in a few, but only a few in my life. And those are the ones that are most enriching, but they're also the most hard, because they demand the most out of you. And you know what I'm talking about in terms of conditions, like unconditional versus conditional? Like the idea is you stop keeping score on the stuff that doesn't matter. Does that make sense? And so for us, the last tool I would say to you, you have the opportunity to think about is what we call the area of destiny. And so this has been done a bunch of different times in a bunch of different ways. But the 201 version is sitting up here. The 101 version is this. What do you love to do, and what are you best at in the world? So I'll say it again. What do you love to do, and what are you best at in the world? If you can answer those questions, like for me, I'm not a big fan of being a manager. I'm not a big fan of crunching numbers. You know, you've heard me say it, but it's entirely true that when an email comes out from our organization, there's a 90% chance I did not write it. Because I still can't type, and I have just recently learned that I definitely have a form of dyslexia that I've lived with my whole life and I didn't realize. And all the times I would struggle with proofing my own work or sending out an email that was broken, I shouldn't be spending time doing that. And not because I'm better than it, not because I'm like risen to some level of fame or fortune, but because people will be their best if they're in their area of destiny. What are you best at, and what do you love to do? Now look, I love to do a lot of things. Like I love to play basketball, but I suck at playing basketball. So it's not really going to be something I'm going to be able to monetize, if you will, right? But answering the questions of what do you love to do and what are you best at puts people in what we call the zone or flow. How many people have heard of those terms before? How many people can remember a time in your life, maybe playing sports, where time slowed down, right? Where it felt effortless to do the work. And at the end of the day, it felt selfless. Write down those three words. Timeless, effortless, and selfless. I'm going to add that to the deck because those are good. And believe it or not, those are states of being, of biochemistry in the body. Whether you like sports or not, the easiest analogies are sports. Or if you've ever found yourself losing a sense of time, that's why we've used the adage of, you lose sense of time, like time flies when you're having fun. No, time doesn't actually fly, right? You lose a sense of watching the clock, which is how we started the conversation of people having the Sunday scaries. So you've got to be the change you want to seek, and here's why. That's, by the way, my son today. Is he not the cutest thing in the entire world? Like, I definitely lucked out on so many levels there. And so a couple other stats for you to think about, which I think is important and relevant for today's discussion. What millennials value in the workplace, training and development. Everything I've talked about today, these three tools, okay? So the idea of the big five, those questions that we asked, the idea of the 25 reasons why in the area of destiny. Put those on pieces of paper. Those are tools of training. You could spend 2 hours on each tool if you understand adult learning, and those could be easily facilitated without upsetting the apple cart of learning and development. Like, you have the opportunity to transfer these today. You don't even have to hire us. How's that for a sales pitch? Seriously, like, this stuff works. As Richard said, just very, 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 like, we're on the same frequency and wavelength. This was as of last year. There were 6 million open jobs. It's way higher than that today. And then this one is the one that I am fascinated by. I have no point of credibility to sit in front of you today, but this is what we're seeing and what we're learning, which is that 40% of the American workforce will be freelancers, temps, independent contractors, solopreneurs. Get this, 2020. That's 2.5 years from now. That's 30 months for those who are math majors. That's not a lot of time. So what this goes back to is people want to do what they want when they want. right? That's what the internet and technology has afforded us the ability to do. So there's really not a lot to think about other than, to us, the cheese has been proverbially moved for all organizations to redo, reset, review, reflect, renew your HR, your learning development, your performance management, because those are the cornerstones. I'll say it again. Take it back to your CEOs. Your performance management, your learning development, and your HR. Those are the three pillars of how to lift up your culture. And if you're in one of those three pillars, to us, you're the humble warriors. You're the epic change makers. You're the ones that really have the ability to make a difference in your organization. Because sometimes the C-suite can't see this for whatever the reasons are. They're not bad people. They just can't see what you see because you're closest to the problem, therefore you're closest to the solution. I'll give you a couple last things just to think about, and then we'll wrap things up with a little Q&A. If you asked us, where do you send your organizations? What are the other things to think about? So to me, there's a couple things to listen to, a couple things to read, a couple things to use. Get your cameras out. These are the 5 must-listen-to podcasts. These are just some favorites from us. There's Sam Harris, Waking Up, the 10X Talk. Joe Rogan's pretty amazing. Aubrey Marcus. I can't imagine Rachel's not listening to him because of his health piece. And then there is some shameless plugs in here. You'll just have to deal with them. The last one on the end, a little shift happens. The 5 must blogs. These are amazing. Farnham Street's probably my favorite one up here. Dan Pink told me about that. The Abundance Insider, Peter Diamandis, what they're happening with, or what's going on with advanced manufacturing, AI, 3D printing, what's happening in Silicon Valley right now is amazing. And so in some ways, there's things to at least learn and glean from what you're going to see from these things. These are all free, by the way. 5 must-use tools. The Best Self Journal is kind of a better play, we believe, on the 5-minute journal. Read it from me. People ask us, how do we keep up with all the business books that are out there? We don't. We do it in snippets, Cliff Notes version, Reader's Digest. That was kind of a cool thing back. How many people remembers the Reader's Digest version? Yeah, the rest of you are like, what is he talking about? Which is sad. Single-handedly, the greatest employee experience pulse survey tool around, hands down. We have no affiliation other than I know the founder and CEO is 15.5. Write that down. It is the most intuitive software that will test and understand from a measurable standpoint where your employees stand, how to wrap up the week, how to inform your managers to have better one-on-ones, and how to really have a more trusting and transparent culture. How's that for an advertisement? We talked about 25 reasons why. There's the Muse. 5 must-read books. This changes for us all the time. Extreme Ownership is a winner, if you have not read that book, by 2 Navy SEALs. One that most people have not heard of, Finite and Infinite Games. That's a book that is mostly read in kind of the California space. Google is famous for this book. They make everybody read it. Richard Saul Wurman, the founder of TED. It's more of a coffee table book, but it's a pretty amazing book. Thomas Friedman, thank you for being late. If you're into what's happening by this freelancer thing and what's going on with the future of work, that's a good one. And then the last one I'm not so sure about. You should maybe give that some thinking. I'm not sure how that got up there. How'd that happen?
It's probably time so they can still look at that book.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is this. I'm not big into bragging, which I know sounds funny given the way that I talk about us. Probably the biggest piece of feedback I've been given, I hired a speaking coach recently. He made me put on a jacket for this, by the way. So some of you know I don't wear jackets, and I'm doing this for you, Joel. So if you watch this. 2, he made me slow down my beginnings. He told me that when he watched my videos before, I seemed disinterested, dispassionate, detached, and not really respecting the platform and privilege. And then the last thing he told me was, I give no case studies of how this actually works. So here's my attempt of being coachable. Please work with me and indulge me and just kind of work this out. But if you read this testimonial, it's one of the ones that kind of blew me away. So we were hired by John Hancock about 3+ years ago. And so, I mean, even using the word John Hancock and saying it is not something you've heard me use or say in a very long time. But he's given me permission to at least show this. It's going to go on the back of the book. He's the CEO of this particular organization. We've had a crazy partnership. They've got a pretty big organization. You probably know who they are. And as he thinks about what we've helped their organization do, again, this is the kind of leader who's vulnerable. This is the kind of leader who has vision. And this is the kind of leader who really understands everything we've talked about today that is possible. That's the only thing I can leave you with, is what is possible. And so in the last 2 years, their employee engagement scores have gone up by 20+%. In the last 2 years, their performance as an organization, I can just say, you can look them up, they're a publicly traded company, they've gone way up. They, by the way, deserve the credit because they're the ones doing the work. So when we get hired, this is not about us. We are there to play a very small role in facilitating the journey. But if you look in front of you, what you have there is, if you have any interest in learning more about our organization, if you have any interest in getting this deck, we're going to send it over to SIG. If you have any interest in looking at some of the data that we've been publishing around the engagement index, I also have an early preview, since this is the last time we're going to do this, by the way. So we developed a 12-week course online that is all about how do you shift your engagement. And so it's all based on the book. It's based on the science that you've heard us talk about today. And so SIG is getting the last early preview of the course before it goes live. So if you have any interest in beta testing this, none of this, by the way, comes with any strings attached. You're not being sold anything. This is just us putting out our content to help the world see a little bit about what we do. And then the last is, there are people sometimes who hear this and say, holy crap, I'd love for our organization to hear this message, or I'd love to figure out how this works. You have that option as well. And with that, this is a little mantra that we have at Shift. It means something to us, and so I'll leave you with that. I won't read it. I'll let you read it. And with that, I will say thank you, and go crush it today.
You have some time for just Q&A?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I can tell you, I use that. I copy from Joe. The better you, better us, better all. That really is the theme that should resonate as you think about your team and your workforce. Does anybody have any questions that they want to throw out from Joe before we wrap up? So I have a question for you, Joe, for those in the audience, because I know them. So we have people here that are, let's say, HR people that get it and that they believe it and they want to have that happen, but yet they work in, let's say, an environment where either the CFO, the CEO, or leadership might not get it. So what would be your words of wisdom when they hear this, as when they go back, maybe 3 things, or as the Yoda of that, how to get the leadership to shift? Or do they make little shifts down below that eventually get that?
So the question I hear is, if I can't get my organization to get it, how do I help them get it, is kind of the big macro thing we hear often. And I would appeal to 3 versions of them. So the first is financial. There are 3 things, if you're sitting in this room and you understand that people are your most important asset, that you can present to them that are facts, undeniable facts. First, the employee lifetime value. How long someone stays at your organization and the value that you've associated with said employees. If you're not using that as a metric, you're sort of lacking or losing an opportunity, if you will, to elevate your status in HR. What it suggests that you know is that there's going to be turnover, nothing lasts forever, and that the idea of extracting value while people are with you, that there's possibility of greater yield. Does that make sense? So understanding sort of the 2 bookends of this is, how quickly are we filling roles and how quickly are we losing people? If you can sort of present to them this information coupled with what you see on Glassdoor about your employee brand, coupled with maybe your employee engagement scores, that begins the conversation with most people who are metrically driven to just start asking the question of, can we do better? Now, what you have to do, what I've learned is, you got to let them arrive at the answers to themselves. And so to us, that's sort of one way to do this. The second, very quickly, is I would say, if you can start sanding around the edges. So how many, don't answer this, it's a rhetorical question, but are you starting to put into your organization tools like 15.5 that are starting to sort of force, if you will, in a very kind way, looking at data in the moment? It's no longer good enough to do an annual survey. It is no longer good enough to wait for performance reviews once a year. You've got to think about going from static to dynamic. Even if you're just asking people at the end of the week, one question. Here it is. You ready? Was this week worth it? Last thing. On a weekly basis, you can get this from us, or you can curate it yourself. Start sending the organization, set up a Google alert for employee experience, culture, data, employee metrics. Look at our blogs, look at the stuff that we've given you, and on a weekly basis, chip away. what others are saying in this space, because at some point you've got to help them either do two things. One, help make the organization better, or help make your exit from the organization great.
Right, great. And Shannon, wave your hand in the back. So Shannon has been on our team, director of HR. She used the 15-5 in her previous life. Somebody has any questions when you leave her from that standpoint, okay? And then the other last question I have for you is, when you think about your organization, I think you in January, you guys went through a journey, and Emily, raise your hand, and was there, and you guys meditated for 30 days, is that correct?
45.
45 days? And, sorry, and what, why, and what was the result of that, just so people can start thinking about how to bring different experiences to their workforce that I think will impact their lives better.
So how many of you have a friend from childhood that you played sports with, or you look back in high school and college and you're still friends? Okay. Some of you still, it's an odd thing not to raise your hand for some of these questions. And so the idea of you remain close with people when you have shared experiences. And shared experiences that are unique, not normal. So we decided, because the science is here, meditation is something you should really try to get into. Personally, I still struggle. The meditation headset is the best thing I've ever done because it helps keep me accountable. Again, I go in fits and spurts, and I would just encourage you to set up these little trials and experiments. It's no different than setting New Year's resolutions, except have an accountability partner. So we set it up this year to do what we call the Shift Games. And the games are ways that we're going to pour into the organization from a how do we help make their cup full. So meditation, as an example, we paired everybody up into groups of 2. They had their accountability partners. We tracked it on a weekly and a daily basis. And not that gamification is the be-all, end-all, but we gave the winning team something that was, sort of a nice little giveaway. And what we noticed with the organization, for whatever it's worth, is nothing. I can't measure it. I can't tell you that I saw this massive increase. I can only tell you I know it made a difference. You don't meditate for 45 days and start to see differences. This is like the long view. So in the case of, if you're really thinking about meditation, what I've learned is it takes like monks in India 40 years to get to a place that they feel Buddha and enlightenment. And you're not going to get there in 45 days. But to the point of the question, in the next 45 days, we decided to have everybody write a 5-year life plan. That was interesting. And then in this last 45 days, we've asked everybody to think about changing one behavior. And so in my case, because I got an accountability partner who is just amazing, I didn't decide to change one behavior. I decided to stop drinking. I decided to go to yoga 30 times in 30 days, and then to meditate again. And it was a ridiculously hard month for me because I was like finding myself doing yoga at like 11 o'clock at night because I'm fairly competitive and I don't like to lose. And then the drinking thing, I was like, I need a drink! And so I'm not ashamed too bad, but I did drink twice, and then that was it. But the point of all this is we've created what we call the Shift Beat. It sort of connects to all of this, which is how do you organize shared experiences? Because those shared experiences create this net and this web, which facilitate trust, engagement, and priority.